Aha, yes. I like that. It says you're live.
We are live.
Yes, we are live. Well, welcome everyone. This is Linda G. Robert, your Back in the Groove Again coach, and travel agent with Travel Only. You know, I've walked two Caminos and have experienced a huge change as a result of these two very different experiences. Today, I'm meeting with Renee Baribeau. Renee, the Practical Shaman, is an author, behavioral healthcare executive, inspirational mentor, respected business coach, dynamic spiritual teacher, wind whistler, podcast host, keynote speaker, author of the award winning Hay House book, Winds of Spirit Ancient Wisdom Tools for Navigating Relationships, Health, and the Divine, that helps to achieve successful lifestyle practices, and creator of the Wind Walker's Wisdom Oracle card deck. She splits her time between residences on Whidbey Island in northern Washington state and Palm Desert in California. Her most recent book is A Pilgrim's Guide to Walking Wisdom, and it contains 11 insights drawn from the 100-mile walk, actually over 100 miles walk, that she has undertook with friends in spring 2024 on the Camino de Santiago, a historic pilgrimage route ending in Galicia, Spain. And of course, that's how we met. We met on one of the Facebook Camino community groups. Welcome, Renee. Welcome.
It's great to be here with you, Linda. And yes, what a beautiful introduction. Sometimes when I hear that, I'm there like, who did all of that?
Yeah, I know, because it sounds amazing. I'm thinking, wow, you've done a lot, and there's so much that we could be talking about. But I do want to focus on some of the books that you've written, like the first one for sure. I want to start with talking about the book, the award-winning Hay House book on Winds of Spirit, the Ancient Wisdom Tools. So tell us how that came about, if you don't mind.
Well, like as any good pilgrimage, it came about pretty much not where you think you were going and thinking you were doing something else, and then finding yourself in the middle of something that you then have to make sense out of. And that was how it was. I thought I was writing a book for my coaching clients. And I thought, like, wow, the wind is a really good metaphor. And I got that idea one day when I was walking along the shore of Evie's Landing up on Whidbey Island, which is really one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life. And all of a sudden, I started to get these messages from the old craggly Douglas firs. Like, stop, look up, look at me. And I'm a shamanic practitioner, and I got this message. You're writing a book about the wind. And I thought I was writing one of those business card door books at that point for, my coaching clients. And it because I had written it already and I had started to write it, but I ended up rewriting it. And I started to really, first I started with wind as a metaphor. Then I started looking around the whole world and I was like, wow, what are these wind spirits? And why does every culture have them?
Oh, love it.
Why do they all have names for the wind? And even more curious, why do they have different attributes? Like you think wind is wind, right? Maybe a hot wind, a cold wind, but no. Like some winds are nurturing, some winds are, devilish, some winds are, very godlike. And so it took me on this 4 or 5 year journey into cultural anthropology, into researching winds from around the world. And every year I'd have lunch with somebody who worked at Hay House, and after about 4 or 5 years, she looked up one day and said, wow, you're writing a book no one's written. And I'm like, I've only been trying to tell you, but I didn't have the words. In
Right.
fairness to her, there were no words because the winds had been silent on this earth for about 2,500, 3,500, 7,000 years because they come out at these transformational periods. And, and so it's a book for all times.
Isn't that interesting? So how? And so the original version of your book, which was intended for your coaching clients, did that get scrapped, kind of, or just
Yeah.
put on a bench, put on a side, side somewhere, and then, or because you said you just restarted it, you just started the whole book again.
I think I wrote about 3 books before I really got to this book.
Oh,
But what happened was it was just the most ridiculous thing because that's not how my coaching clients came to me. And that's not what my coaching clients were looking for, because most of my coaching clients are very successful people to start with. So they really didn't need that kind of coaching advice from me. They were more looking for their soul wisdom. And so, so one day this woman who I was coaching from New York City, she said to me, well, why don't we call to one of those wind spirits? I have this wind whistle. And I
oh,
like, okay, well, let's pick one and call one. So we picked one out of at this point, they were on scraps of paper. They were just written these names, and we called to one. And all of a sudden, the door bangs open and bangs shut. And we were both looking at she was, it was a Zoom call. We were both looking at each other like, okay, we called up the wind and here they show up. And that's how it started when I realized that I wasn't calling on a metaphor. I was actually calling on a spirit. And in the journey, I learned that Holy Spirit is a wind, Ruach is a wind, Nirvana is a no wind, Om is the wind between passing things. And many years in Chile before, I'd been given the name Treunco, which meant the sound between passing things. And she told me at the time it was a big name that I'd have to grow into, but I had no idea that I was actually bringing back ancient wisdom onto this planet that had been lost since the comet hit the planet 14,500 years ago or thereabouts. And so it became a labor of love because, I went out and looked at the sky one day and I'm there like, you want me to write a book about the wind? People hate the wind, and now you want me to write a book? I thought this was going to make me popular.
right.
So lo and behold, it took the last 6 years I've been building a tribe that subscribed to this kind of belief, and it's been a big job. So recently, I created the Windwalker
yes.
Oracle, and what's crazy is that I found 32 more wins when I was working on this last year. And I mean, the last 10 years, let's get real. And, actually putting it together took the last year. And so now these cards give the wind a magic carpet ride to ride on so that they can get to people in a way that people can now understand this ancient wisdom.
Wow. I don't know a lot about tarot cards, but from what I understand, you're tuning into a spirit or maybe a wind, I suppose in your case, as you're developing each card, I guess. But then there's an illustrator too, right? Did you also do the illustrations?
I did.
Oh, so
I did illustration.
Yeah.
What had happened was for years I tried to get illustrators, and now you have to remember I went around the globe with these winds, and it turns out there's just too many wind stories after wind stories of how this happened, but when I went, I kept trying to get illustrators, and they could illustrate from one culture, but they couldn't go cross-culturally.
Oh.
So I'm a graphic designer, and then last couple of years with the ability with AI and Adobe Illustrator and some of the other graphic design programs, I was able to create these cards in a way that people could say, "Wow, that's how I know that wind."
Oh, so do you have, and I like pulling cards once in a while just for the fun of it. And usually there's a beautiful image with a few words. And of course, there's a booklet that has, all the
Yep.
interpretation and so on. So can you tell us a little bit more about that process? So, you've designed your cards, and then of course you have a book of some sort to help us interpret the cards we pull.
So what I think is different about these
Okay.
cards than other cards. So this is
Mm.
the Aztec wind. Now this is an interesting story because when I was at Teotihuacan, I heard this wind whistle, and I was showing you the wind whistle before, but that's not the one that they made there. And I ran over to the whistle guy and I said, I have to have that. And so I traded all my wares for a couple of these whistles. And then all of a sudden, it's very serendipitously, I met a sound scientist who studied the Aztec whistles. I mean, of all things. And so
Really?
he introduced me to a whistle maker. And the whistle maker, I said, I really want a friendlier whistle than the death whistle per se. And so he molded me a whistle. And the week we started shipping the whistles from Mexico City to California, they uncovered Ecatel's temple in
Oh.
Mexico City when they
Mm.
raised a supermarket. And that's how this is you cannot make this stuff up. So this win that I pulled for today makes total sense for you where you are in your life and me, about rising from the ashes, rising to what makes us passionate. And
Mm.
what that's what these journeys do. And in fact, like that's what the journey did for me, because I was found myself frozen last year. I hadn't written in 6 years, and because it was quite a birth, and I was frozen. And so this wind, you're calling upon the winds of passion to come back in and blow in my life. There's nothing like a pilgrimage to get you there.
Yeah. No kidding. So let's make the bridge now between this and last spring, May 24. Like how did that happen?
Well, so it started long as you know, Linda, it started long before the journey actually took place. In the fall, and the book is called A Pilgrim's Guide to Walking Wisdom, 1111 Insights.
Looks great, yes.
Last fall, I started seeing 1111, 111 over and over and over again. It was just uncanny. And then I do an annual fire tenders gathering, and at the end of the gathering, I was broadcasting to hundreds of people, but there was no sound. There was just me and the fire. And, I don't have a big enough crew. I was out at the fire. I didn't know it until later. But it didn't really matter because I was having a moment with me. And the people watching, even without sound, could see that something important was transpiring. So the very next day I was at the airport and I got this call. It was Christmas Eve. And I was thinking, wow, this was the most beautiful ending. This was just so peaceful. This was so glorious. Thank the winds. And so the call comes in when I was at the airport that I was heading down to Palm Springs to my for a month vacation in my house, but the Airbnb tenant who was staying at my house passed away.
Oh.
And so I had kind of thought I was living more in Whidbey, but I didn't realize that my connection to my place in the desert was still so deep. And it sent me into trauma. I froze, and then I did the cleanup from, it was a natural causes death, but there was some cleanup, and knowing that somebody died in my house as much as I'm a shaman, sent me into a tailspin.
Right.
I froze, and it took me this year, and all of a sudden in January, this man I hadn't heard from in years sent me a wind map, and I'm there like, well, that's really nice. That we just connected after 10 years or so, and it was only through some emails and very sparsely, and so then I thought I really need. Once I got through this, I said I need an adventure, and I thought there was something coming for this Greek trip I wanted to take, but then one day I got this email from a friend of mine who hadn't emailed me in 10 years about the Camino trip she was taking in May. And I wrote her back and they're like, well, if I bring a bunch of people along, can I go for free? I'm always masterminding.
Sure.
And so I got somebody with a bigger follow than me, and we decided to do this. And so that's how we ended up going. But then that same man sent me a book called Walking Home by Sonia Choquette. And he said, I can't walk. Could you walk for me? And they're like, well, sure. Not a clue on how I'm going to walk for anyone else, not even how I was going to walk for myself. And so every day I started doing these 11:11 insights for him.
Oh.
But hundreds of people were watching them. And I got home and I'm there like, well, God, these are 11 really beautiful insights that I gained, because every day I was walking with a new question. And so I started writing them down.
Okay, I just want to stop for 1 second.
Sorry.
I want to make sure I understand. So I know you were getting 11:11 insights before the walk.
Mm-hmm.
And so were you writing at that time, the 11:11 insights? No, it was during the walk that you started
I
developing
didn't write
these.
during the walk, because during the walk, it's just enough to walk. I
Okay,
don't know how anyone could really keep a journal and keep much. But I did have these videos that I was doing before I started walking every day, because to me, doing that walk 11, 12 miles a day was all I could do. So it was like a lot. So I'd get it out in the morning, first thing, when I still had a smile on my face and energy to go, I'd do whatever I'd learned the day before,
I see.
whatever question I'd walked with. And so then when I got back, I thought like, well, I should really write these down. That was kind of how it started, because I was in the process of another book that all of the publishers kept saying no, that they wouldn't publish. And so all of a sudden, that's a big depression when everyone keeps saying no, and to a really good book too. And so I started working on this one, and I sent a chapter to a friend, and she said, that is really brilliant. And if you added this. So I took what she said and I added it, and I made that the formula for all the rest of the chapters. And then I finished the book really quickly in 3 months. And my editor was liking it. Everyone was liking it. And I'm there like, I never heard back from Don. Never heard back from Don about how
That fellow.
my fellow, about how he liked the insights. And so the next morning I wake up, and that resounding voice I heard, or a dream or whatever, said, he's not here anymore. Well, this is going to make me cry, but he died the day I started walking.
Oh my goodness gracious.
And I didn't.
And you didn't know that, of course.
I didn't know that, because we had really not. It had been like these intersections. It wasn't like we were friends. We had gone to shaman school together years and years ago. So these drop-ins from him were just like, were really out of the ordinary. And I should have followed through more. And I could say, if I had, there's a chapter about no regrets, but that might be a regret that I didn't reach out and find out more. But I don't know if the book would be written or telling the story or dedicated to him had I known all of that.
Right.
So he came in like this 11:11 angel for me, and got me writing again, got the wind oracle finished because it was ready to go, and I was frozen, and all of the stuff changed. And I can't even tell you the things that are happening now with this book, because my first book, like my mom said, your new book is so much easier to read than your first book.
Oh. It's a process, right? It's a learning process.
Well, no, this is an easy read. This is like read one insight a day and you'll be done in no time type of thing. It's an
So,
easy.
yeah. Do you think Dawn helped you write it?
I really feel like he had a bigger insight to my process than I was having, and how generous his soul was on his last few days on this earth to send me two gifts, and without any expectation of anything in return, and then to not even know that I wrote him a whole book. I
Yeah.
mean, and I don't know, it's kind of one of those life's mysteries, but I really believe that that's how pilgrimage works.
Yeah. And I love how we don't really know the whys, things happen. We just know they happened. We experience them. And you went through this process. I'd love to know a little bit more about the walk,
Okay.
just a little bit from where you started and, how it was for you every day, that experience, just a bit. And we'll kind of tie it back into the book if we can.
I think it starts with a really funny experience for me. I wasn't feeling, I go on these Facebook groups and see all these people always talking about, like, oh, I'm going to go out and walk 100 miles today. And I really don't think that that matters. I think it's your spiritual conditioning and your, your why, your reason for being there, that
Mm-hmm.
gets you the people you need to meet, and the push to get through it. But I was really concerned about my feet.
Mm,
So I ended up ordering lots of shoes beforehand and tried them all on and stuff.
yeah.
So, but I was sharing this in the group because a lot of the people on the walk were younger than me. And so the first night when we met in Porto for dinner, these two young girls said, "Oh, let's walk back to the hotel with you." And I'm there like, I'm power walking them back to the hotel. And they said, "Oh my word, we thought you were just going to be the oldest, slowest member of this group with all of that talk about your shoes." And I just looked at them. I said, "No, I wanted to make sure that I could keep up with the power walkers. Honestly,
Right.
I wanted to make sure that I could do this walk with, because if my feet were uncomfortable, it would have been a miserable walk."
Yeah.
And so,
Yes.
but one of the things was I was so busy walking, I didn't I didn't stop to smell the grapes,
Mm,
vineyards along the way, because I just powered through a lot of it. And so when I was writing the book, I actually had to go back and do a lot of research about where I was, what I was seeing,
right. Oh,
and you,
yes.
and like I'm like now I'm ready to go back and walk a second time. Now that I know what I walked by, what I saw, what those things were, and all of that, because the walk is strenuous.
Yes, it can be strange. Which one did you do, Renee? The coastal or the central or the
It's a coastal route.
you did the
What's
coastal.
what's
Okay. I did the
strenuous about
central
it?
route.
Okay, it's
Mhm.
strenuous because most of us aren't walking 10 miles a day.
Yeah.
And that's a hike in itself.
I'm laughing because we do have to prepare, physically. Most people think it's just a physical thing, but it's really not. Like in your case, you've proven that maybe a little bit of prep would have been helpful, but mentally and spiritually, that connection seemed to be there for you automatically.
I, I think so. And one of the other things that was really important for me was I walked alone a lot.
Hmm.
And so sometimes in the group it'd be like you'd run into somebody from your own group somewhere along the day and maybe walk with them for a few hours. But I spent a lot of time walking alone, which gave me the option of taking left-hand turns and taking right-hand turns, and not necessarily going the way of the yellow clamshells all the time, And or like the tour guide said, "Oh, no one goes that way." And when I, took the boat over the Minnow River, he dumped me right there and said, "Go that way." Like it wasn't like so. But I got to be in the most magical forest
Mm.
that I doubt my tour person ever saw or anyone else on my trip saw, because they
Mm.
did the little route right over the hill when I did the 10-mile walk around. But it was like one of my most favorite days.
Yeah. So it sounds like you walked it at your own pace. You didn't always follow the group. You wanted to walk by yourself as well. What were some of the differences between walking by yourself and then walking with some of the other members in that group?
So you have to understand, we had a really interesting group because a lot of people were, really know themselves. And we had talked before we went that there was no shame in taking a cab.
Right, right.
We had a group that I bought hats for people before I went that said uh, Camino Babes.
Mm,
And so
I
there was
like
a
the
group
name.
that went from town to town in cabs. And I think if they walked 6 miles the whole trip, and they had their own experience. And so one of the things was in my book I talk about it, is how one of them was a low key to me, like a trickster who every night tried to get me to be in the cab the next day. And every night when my legs were so, because we shared a room some nights, my legs were sore and I couldn't move them. They're like, "Yeah, let me think about it." And by 8 o'clock in the morning, when I was dropping my bag down there, I'd be like back out there walking. Um, and one day was really helpful. I was really extra exhausted. We'd spent time at the spa and I was tired.
Mm,
And I ran into a really kind person in our group, and she paced herself with me that day.
mm.
And when I just couldn't go on anymore, she said, "Well, let's just take a cab." And so we took a cab with no shame, and
No,
he took us to the waterfall that I would never have seen that day because I was too exhausted, and I wouldn't have gone a quarter mile off any trail because I was like I was like the horse going back to the stable that day.
yeah. And I think these things, everything that happens on the Camino, everything happens for a reason.
Hmm.
It it really, the people you meet, the decisions you make, everything is
Hmm.
driven by some source of some kind.
Hmm.
And the experiences that you go through are exactly what you need to experience.
Hmm.
So how do you then transfer that to your insights?
So the insights, you know, the insights are greater than just what I've learned there. It's probably the combination of the first memoir, that coach
Mm.
book I was writing, the Winds of Spirit.
Well,
But
sure, because you're a different person by then.
yeah,
You've
and
evolved, right?
because my first book, that's never been published. I think a lot of that shows up in here in a healed way.
Mm.
Because the first book was, my dysfunctional life as a chef. And,
As a chef, I didn't, wait a minute.
my first career, I was a chef and I was
Okay.
a restaurateur. And I wrote a book about that called The Shaman Chef, How Cooking Saved My Life. But see, this is more like my friend says that this book is a cross between The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and The Four Agreements. This is
Okay.
this is the healed book. This is the book where all of the stuff comes together, and through this walk, which it could be a death in your family. It could be a number of different things that makes you take this inward pilgrimage with yourself. But these are kind of insights and steps you'll go through as you become whole.
As you become whole again. So, who is the book written for? You've given a couple of hints there, but Who were you thinking of,
Well, it's
or
been a
what were you thinking of when you were writing the book?
well, I'm always thinking of like when most authors are always thinking of, oh, everyone's going to benefit from this book, right? But it's just not true.
Yeah.
Right now, it's been a number one hot bestseller in Walking for Exercise, which never occurred to me. That was my editor. Memoirs, travel, and biographies, and travel Spain and Portugal.
Oh,
But what's come from it is this whole idea of walking other people through these insights through a book walkers club. And
mm.
no idea that that was coming.
Book, excuse me, just a second here. Book Walkers Club?
Mm-hmm. So I
Okay, I
created.
have to ask, what is that?
So what I'm if you go over to bookwalkersclub.com, you'll see that what I've done is created. I'm creating like a club where you might, instead of walking around the corner, bitching about your life, you read a chapter, listen to the audio of a chapter, and then you can download a worksheet that I made for each insight.
Like journaling and stuff.
Have a conversation with somebody else and me about how this insight shows up in your own life.
Interesting.
So that just came out from a conversation. I mean, that's the thing with these things. You never know where they're going. I wrote this little simple book and somebody read it and said, I want to be able to pull out those questions at the end of your chapters. And so I thought, like, well, I need to make worksheets then.
Yeah.
And so it just, one thing led to the next.
Yeah. Well, that means that, people are curious. People want to use it for their personal growth, personal insights as well. So, yeah, because, I've read and I've heard that you should be very specific when you choose your niche for a book, right? Who you're writing your book for. Well, everyone? No, you need to, that's what I've heard. You need to be very, very, very specific. But in your case, it wasn't really like that.
Well, no, I believe it's for women in transition, women at transitional periods in their life. And, not to say that men won't read it, because men have transitions too. And remember, it was inspired by a man angel.
Absolutely, that's right.
I think that it's a book for people who are in transition and looking for a better way to walk through it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of saying it. And through walking, like the physical act of walking as well, if you decide to go on a Camino with a particular intention in mind to heal through that physical walking, and then, tapping into some of your insights can be quite
every day with
experience.
Sorry.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I walked every day with a question, and sometimes the question would get answered immediately. Like one day I was feeling left out from the group because, well, there's a long story. You can read about it in the book, but so I'm there like, well, what would it be like to be, more of a group walker? So here I turn the corner, and there in front of me is a pasture of sheep. And, one has its bell on, and all the other sheep are following it. And I just laughed. I mean, because when you ask who, what, why, not a why question so much, but when you ask a question, you get answers really quickly, sometimes quickly. Sometimes, they take a little while longer, but every morning I set out with one question, and, somewhere along the line, that question would morph into another question.
Yeah.
And so my book gives you questions to walk with.
Right. Yes, it's perfect for that. I love that. All right. We've got just a couple of minutes left. I would like to end with asking you, how can we find out more about you? Where can we get your book? And I'll add the link as well so that we can, look into your book more. Where can we buy it now?
So you can buy it everywhere books are sold. It's sold in Canada as well, on Amazon, and it's also in Barnes and Noble. And you can go over to my website, thepracticalshaman.com. It's, there's links there. And if you buy it before February 6th, there's these great, amazing gifts
Mm.
that are that like there's an EFT tapping book. There's
Oh.
there's an astrology reading about, is this my year for travel?
Oh, I love that
Oh,
question. I love that.
and
Yeah.
so there's like gifts to go along. And then there's, if you're a writer, there's a writing accountability 7-day writing program from one of my writing coaches. So there's some really nice gifts that go along with purchasing the book and sending me the receipt. And I'll make sure, Linda, you have that link. So, because it's
Well,
all set up ready
please.
to go.
Yeah. Please. Yeah. I'll put that link up because I am very interested in that.
Right? There's nothing like, oh, and if you leave a review the first
Oh,
week, if you leave a review the first week, I will send you a recording of a 3-card Windwalker's Wisdom Oracle that I'm going to do for people. It might take me a minute to get through them, but so those are the gifts for buying my book right off the get go.
wow. That's awesome. What an incentive and what a pleasure it was to talk with you. I know we can probably talk for hours and hours and hours at a time. What would be your, let's say, your final words for today?
Well, I can tell you have a beautiful spirit, and I know that you're leading women through a process. And what really spoke to me when we were talking earlier was that you start like you do more preparation work with people. This was a three-month decision for us, but you can really prepare and really work with a coach like Linda to get yourself organized for that. And I think that's important. My year unfolded the way it did, but that doesn't mean that needs to be your year.
Right. And it's true that every person will end on the Camino for so many different reasons. Every person that I've talked to, they've all had different reasons for why they want to walk the Camino. But I'm also hoping that there are some women out there that don't know about the transformative nature of the Camino because maybe they never heard of that, particular walk.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, we shall see where that leads. Thank you again, Renee. I really appreciated your time today, and we're going to be ending our stream in just another few seconds there. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.